Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get this started. First question. What is your opinion of a short-term monodiet of white potatoes? Alright, a lot of you guys are going to go, why in the world would anyone ask that question? Well, the reason someone would ask that question is because this is actually a trend that was started a few years back. A guy had done some reading and had found out that, he shouldn't have any real nutritional deficiencies if he occasionally adds a few little things to the potatoes, a little bit of cheese or chives and things like that to his potatoes if he lived on a diet of something like 2,000 calories of white potatoes a day, because he had read that they were the most satiating food or carbohydrate source according to studies. And so he decided to give it a try, and it was successful. The guy lost quite a bit of body fat in a fairly short period of time and felt full and was very rarely hungry. So would I recommend this? Not necessarily for everyone, but for someone who really is struggling to lose just a little bit of body fat, and they have 10 pounds or so they want to lose that they can't, it might not be a bad idea. And let me break down why. And again, you've got to remember this is only in the short term. Potatoes are one of the most satiating foods that's out there. I mean, there's studies on it. It's been confirmed. It has a decently balanced nutrition profile. It's not amazing, but it's decently balanced enough that you could survive on mostly white potatoes for a short period of time without developing any nutritional deficiencies. Again, you could also bridge the gap with a little bit of fish oil, a few little veggies on the sides, things like that. A little butter on them every now and then, or a little bit of cheese on them. So it can totally be done by eating mostly potatoes. And you're calling it a mono diet because you're getting over 90% of your calories pretty much from one food source. And the other thing to consider there is the satiety factor. And this is why, if it fits your macros, doesn't work for obese people, because we're talking about, getting a wide diversity of foods that you enjoy. Well, what we found in studies is that people who are prone to overeating, by giving themselves a moderately bland diet, meaning they eat foods that they like, they're okay, but they're not amazing, they're not like their favorite foods, but that they don't dislike either, that they're just kind of middle of the road, they'll eat them, they're okay. Without a wide diversity of foods, they tend to have a much higher diet adherence. For people who are prone to overeating wide diversities of food, those are the people who struggle to just take one bite or a small amount of something they really, really like. It's going to make them crave it and eat more of it. So for some people like that, fairly bland diets like monodiets work. That's another reason ketogenic diets work, because they restrict you to a very small number of different foods that have fairly similar flavors in a lot of ways. And the lack of diversity tends to control overeating and cravings in many people. So white potato diet, a mono diet of white potatoes, could be a viable short-term weight loss method because it's an extremely high satiety food with a decently balanced nutrition profile, and again, you're limiting food options and flavors for diet adherence. So it's viable. It's just not something I would recommend in the long term, because you will eventually develop nutritional deficiencies eating something like this. But could potatoes themselves remain a year-round staple of someone trying to maintain their body weight? Yes, absolutely, just because of their high satiety. All right, next question. Could you make or modify one of your current programs, or suggest how a fitness enthusiast of the advanced rank could train? I cannot keep up with the progression pace of intermediate programs because my gains are so slow from diminished returns. All I see for advanced programs are bodybuilding bullshit pro splits that are just a list of endless isolation exercises with no form of progression or periodization. All right, that is one of the problems you're going to run into with they're calling advanced programs, or just programs for guys on 2 grams of gear growth hormone and insulin who are trying to bodybuild. The problem with advanced programs is that they require fine-tuning for the individual. And the other thing that you have to remember, once you are truly an advanced lifter, it sucks. You don't see gains. It takes forever to get gains. And the thing is, one of the things that defines that you are an advanced lifter, when you basically have to train your program you're training a year ahead of time. Meaning, when you're a novice lifter, you're programming by the individual day and individual week. You're expecting to see progress every single week on something, some type of progress weekly. That's what defines a novice lifter. An intermediate, it's more of a 3 or 4 week progression, meaning you're looking at, okay, can I be stronger or better in my performance elements a month from now than I am from today? So you're looking at like monthly progression, whereas once you're a truly advanced lifter, you are looking at yearly progression of, can I be better a year from today than I am today? And that's why it really sucks. And so it requires year-long programming. So essentially what you would have to do, what I would almost recommend for the advanced lifter, you could do a linear periodization like my intermediate program, but you're going to need to scale back the progression quite a bit. And what you add through each individual block is going to have to be smaller. It might have to be cut to like a third or a fourth of what you would be doing, meaning you may not be able to actually add individual sets. You just might be trying to add one rep week to week or something. Like if you're running a linear periodization where in the 3-week blocks you increase a set every time, you might have to just increase a rep. And then so if you're doing 8 rep sets week 1, you'd go to 9 rep sets week 2, 10 rep sets week 3, then reset down, and only a very, very small increase on the bar. You might have to actually drop reps. So something you might have to drop, increase the weight 5%, and then drop down to 6 reps. And even that might be too rapid a progression for a truly advanced lifter. So it gets really tricky trying to program for advanced lifters. You've got a lot of factors to consider, and it's really why you don't see cookie cutter programs for advanced lifters, because their progressions vary so much. They have individual weaknesses that need to be addressed. And usually, if you're an advanced lifter and you're still trying to actually make progress and not maintain what you're doing, you're probably competing in something, in which case you're going to have sport-specific needs to consider. So very, very few truly advanced lifters who are still trying to make any sort of real progress are not competing in something to where they would have access to coaching and stuff anyways. Because at the end of the day, people who are just casual gym goers who have reached the advanced status are probably not planning their training out a year ahead of time, which is kind of what you have to do at the advanced level. You've got to be looking in terms of yearly progression instead of monthly. All right, next question. The age-old argument, compound versus isolation. Hey, Jason, is there any advantages to isolation over compound? I see many for compound over isolation. Example, bench press uses similar range of motion for the upper arm as a pec fly, but there is less risk of shoulder injury due to the motor pattern being easier to learn. The ratio of pec to tricep force applied is canceled out by the additional weight to the move. I hear a lot more people getting shoulder joint flaring doing flies than presses, and the movement is much easier to do safely when fatigued. And if you don't press to lock out, which is the most tricep fatiguing part of the press, you can get a similar range of motion on an incline press as a flat fly. I'd love to hear your arguments. Thanks for the advice. Yeah, that's the thing that you have to consider when it comes to compound versus isolation. Most real experts are going to recommend that you do mostly compounds. Isolation movements should generally be reserved for hitting a weak point. And that's what's so funny. You'll see guys who, they do all these various chest presses, but then they want to do a fly. Why do they want to do a fly? Because they want to take the tricep out of the exercise so that they can work more on the chest, when, you're already getting chest activation, just as much chest activation from the presses as you're going to get from the fly. If you're getting the full range of motion, or you're picking one that has the same range of motion, you're going to do it easier. And again, if you're careful, lower chance of injury when fatigued, like you said. But then they'll pull the triceps out, but then they'll go do tricep exercises later, when it's like, if you're worried that your triceps were limiting your chest development, you could have just done tricep exercises to get stronger on your pressing so that your chest continues to get overloaded. So people will end up isolating multiple muscles that they were working with the same compound because they want to cut different ones out and focus on them, when it actually doesn't give you any more muscle growth to focus on them. The whole point of focusing on an individual muscle with isolation is because you're trying to bring up a muscle that is lagging from doing the compound movements, or that's your weak link. And so, for example, if you do a lot of chest presses or weighted dips or whatever, you probably should only need to isolate one of the 3 major muscles involved. Say, the pecs, the anterior deltoids, and the triceps. You probably only need to isolate one of those, whichever of those is lagging the most after doing the chest presses. Whichever one seems to be the weak link, that's what you want to isolate. So that's the problem. It's not that isolation versus compound it's better. It's that compound generally is more efficient use of your time. You get way more done, build way more muscle mass for every minute you spend in the gym. And it's that people try to use isolation movements as primary builders is when they run into problems. That's when they run into injuries. That's when they run into having to spend extra hours in the gym they don't need, when if used appropriately, isolation movements are there to isolate and bring up your weak links, the muscles that just are not getting enough stimulation and growth for you personally doing the compounds. And it's probably only going to be a couple of muscles through your whole body. or they're there to address a specific performance element that is being missed with your compound movements that you might need for a specific sport or a certain type of development, such as, again, a tricep movement that works the long head more if all you're doing is presses for the triceps. So again, it's about appropriate use of them. It's not one is better than the other. It's that for most purposes, compounds are better, but there are always going to be situations in which an isolation movement provides an advantage for you, for your individual needs, not necessarily for everyone. All right, next question. I struggle to hit depth on a normal barbell squat, but have no issues with the front squat. Is this a sign of some sort of muscle imbalance? No, it's not a sign of a muscle imbalance. What it is a sign that you might be doing a wider stance low bar squat, because that might be what you're calling a normal squat. Most people can't squat as deep on a low bar as they can a high bar squat or on a front squat. So if you're doing a low bar, that's what's going on. If you're having trouble hitting the same depth or hitting full depth and you're doing a high bar Olympic style squat with a shoulder width stance, then you have some sort of mental hang up, because normally it would be that you would be leaning forward too far. But if you've been doing front squats and hitting depth, you probably have corrected most of your forward lean issues by doing the front squats, because they strengthen up those thoracic erectors and everything that contribute to these problems and force you to learn to use your core better. So you just probably have some sort of mental hang up with the weight that you're using on the high bar squat. And it's something you're going to have to learn to get over, maybe doing some squatting to a box really deep with your normal, just to get past the mental hang up that you have happening. And again, that mental hang up is usually like a fear of falling backwards if you go too deep with that weight on top of your back, because you're uncomfortable with the weight that's there. And so that's what some people need to do. You know, another way to get around that too, if it's the weight itself that's giving you the mental hang up, it's like when you're going really heavy. What you can also do is practice some walkouts with 50 or 60 or even up to 100 pounds more than you squat, just to get more comfortable with that heavier weight on top of your back. And that's also an option to help with that mental hang up, in addition to the squatting to a box. Those two in combination are a really good tool to get you past that mental hang up. But if you're low bar squatting instead of high bar squatting, that's what it is that you just can't squat as deep with the low bar, and you might need to start adjusting your footing position until you find the low bar position that will let you squat to your maximum depth for you personally. All right, next question. You've stated in the past that veganism is simply an ethical choice and not a health one. Why is it then that there has been Harvard studies illustrating otherwise, and of course the WHO stating red meat, unprocessed, to be a probable carcinogen? Actually, I believe the WHO stated that processed red meat was the problem. But again, the probable carcinogen thing and the whole vegan thing, all right, you've got to look at it this way. Show me one study that shows that vegans outlive any culture or society that eats meat, at least in moderation. Think about it. If you look at all of the longest lived cultures in the world, the longest lived regional diets in the world, every one of them include meat. They don't include large amounts of meat. They're not gorging themselves on meat like on ketogenic diets, but they all eat meat. They're usually leaner meat sources. And you know what? In fact, all of them eat some red meat, yet they're the longest living cultures. Things like an Okinawan diet, the Mediterranean diets, things like that all incorporate meat. Vegans cannot compete with that. So this whole idea, vegans seem to always think that their diets are superior, but where's the statistics showing they are? You can't look at something like red meat and say, oh, it's a carcinogen, so anyone who eats any amount of red meat, not just red meat in moderation, is going to die sooner than a vegan. They're going to get cancer at a higher rate than vegans. Well, vegans don't get cancer at a lower rate than the general population. So you're clearly missing something here. You can't step back and ignore the statistics. Where are all these long-lived vegans? Where are the vegans who have better health markers than these other groups? Where are the vegans who are living as long as these other groups that we study? Where are they? If veganism is so superior and healthy, where are they? I understand the ethical argument, but again, veganism takes things to the extreme. They step back and say, because red meat could be a potential carcinogen, that you shouldn't eat any of it, that eating it in moderation isn't better. Yet the people who eat these foods in moderation tend to be healthier and live longer than vegans if they're eating an overall balanced diet. And the same thing, vegans step back and hear something like, aha, if we eat more plants, if we eat a lot of plants in our diet with all the phytonutrients and fiber, it's better for health. So then they assume that your diet needs to include only these things and start excluding all these other products. And they end up with a diet that isn't as balanced, and they don't live as long as these other groups. And so my counter argument to vegans is, where is the data? Where's the proof that vegans are living as long as these other groups are? These longest living cultures with the healthiest diets. Where's your data? You're not. Vegans, at the end of the day, as a demographic, don't appear to be particularly healthy. They're not having amazing health. They're not having super health from their diet. They're not doing better than these other traditional diets that include meat in moderation, and even include red meat in moderation sometimes. You are simply not living as long as they are. And until you are, you don't have any grounds to claim a health superiority to your diet. It's cherry picking data and not understanding that there's a difference between moderation of certain things that could actually have other benefits to you beyond their potential negatives when you consume too much, versus just consuming too much. And vegans don't ever seem to grasp that with the data. It just goes over your head. And at the end of the day, veganism is an ethical choice. And you know what? I respect your right to that ethical choice. I'm okay with you having that ethical choice. That's your right. But it's the false claims that it's somehow healthier than these other more balanced approaches that's the problem. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.